I'm back! So I'll probably edited this, or if I can edit it and get it into one video, that's fine, or I might make it a two-parter. So yeah, we did crash. And we crashed before I was able to move on to my video, so let me go back and sort of revamp it a little bit. So Donald Trump made a speech on Tuesday following the Charlottesville incident, which was infamy. Now, the background about it was he made a statement on the Friday that it happened, or the Saturday that it happened, saying there's a lot of violence on both sides, on many sides, on many sides. And a lot of people were saying, well, you can't really compare the two because one of them drove a freaking vehicle into the counter-protesters, and while maybe the counter-protesters did get a little roughy, they didn't like drive a car into anybody, so trying to sort of like, both sides are, at fault, blah, 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 it kind of seemed a little bit dismissive at best. And the fact that he did it before some sort of executive order signing also seemed very dismissive. Because, it's like, oh, there's more important things I need to do right now. You know what I mean? Instead of saying, well, this is important, let me get doing that. Like, let me focus entirely on this problem and at least pretend to give a crap. So then he made a statement on Saturday, which is more, or Sunday, which is more nuanced. But then in the tower on Tuesday, he took fielding from the press. He fielded questions from the press, and it didn't go too well. He kind of reverted back to his position, and he even made a lot of arguments that basically defended the positions of the people who went there in the first place. Like he did take a side on the protests. He's like, well, they're morally equivalent, but he started making arguments for the people who were protesting in Charlottesville. Like, he was basically defending their positions. So he did sound like he had an investment towards the one side, which a lot of people have criticized, and even a lot of people on the conservative right started to move away from. But I think there's also an additional thing. And this goes back to what I was going to discuss and what I said before the video kind of crashed out on me, was Donald Trump's coinage of the term alt. And the thing that he did to it, probably not purposefully, but he did alter people's vision on what the term alt means as a prefix. And I'm going to show you this video right now where he coined the term alt-left.
Right is behind these attacks, and he linked that same group to those who perpetrated the attack in Charlottesville.
Well, I don't know, I can't tell you. I'm sure Senator McCain must know what he's talking about. But when you say the alt-right, define alt-right to me. You define it. Go ahead.
Well, I'm saying that
Come on, let's go.
Senator McCain defined them as the same group.
Okay, what about the alt-left that came charging you? Excuse me. What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
This is not your
Let me ask you this. What about the fact that they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do. So, as far as I'm concerned, that was a horrible, horrible day. Wait a minute, I'm not finished.
Well, we sort of are. You get the point. So, see, what the interesting thing here is that the people in the alt-left, the people in the alt-right, the interesting thing, there was an interesting reaction to this. The people on the left side of my Twitter feed started to go, well, he's making up this word and it's BS. Like, no one calls themselves alt-left, and that's very true. The people who are sort of in the more violent fringes of the left are more like proactive, sort of like we need to be prepared to be vigilant, are what they call Antifa. Which, by the way, he said for the first time in the Phoenix thing. Like, that's the first time I've heard anyone say it out loud. Which is kind of weird because, like, is this real life now? Like, it's weird that all the stuff I'm reading on the internet's actually starting to be discussed in normal, in actual politic. It's freaking weird. All right, it's just like you always try and separate the real life from the internet, and then they're starting to blur together, and not in the best of ways. But that being said. So a lot of people on the left side were saying, well, alt-left doesn't really exist, and he's just trying to emphasize the moral equivalency of this thing, and blah, blah, blah. And so they were, very, they were very like, this is just a stupid thing, it doesn't do any good or anything. Interestingly, the alt-right, when they took this phrase, they were like, oh man, yeah, he's doing it, because they saw like the left. He was getting the left angry about it and all this stuff. But they don't realize, what the alt-right doesn't realize is what the president did here. When he created the term alt-left, he didn't make it morally equivalent that the bad people on the right and the bad people on the left and blah, blah, blah. He literally created the prefix. He literally took that prefix of alt and he made it equivalent to bad. Very subtly and in very subtle ways. Like, because alt-right is his base. The alt-right really praises Donald Trump. But what Donald Trump here is he took the alt-right and he threw him under the bus. Very subtly and very carefully. And here's why. Because he's saying, well, the alt-left is just as bad. The alt-left is just as bad. The alt-left doesn't. No one has, on the left that I have heard, has called themselves alt-left. Alt-right is something that people have called themselves in the right side of the political side of our country, mostly when they don't agree with conservatives about being restrained in language and being restrained. There's also other differences, which I'll get into later, in my feelings and opinions on those differences. But in essence, and the most important thing to take away from that is that Donald Trump inadvertently, or advertently, I have no idea, made the alt prefix a sour word. It's now a poison that you stick in front of something that you don't like. So calling someone alt-right is now just like saying they're the bad people on the right. And saying alt-left is saying they're the bad people on the left side. They're the violent people. You see what happened there? And people on the alt-right, even though they're like, yeah, Donald Trump is protecting us and this is great and everything's going well, all of a sudden they're getting all this backlash and they're wondering, why are we getting all this backlash? Well, as Donald Trump just inferred, if you put the word alt in front of your political stance, you're bad apples. So this speech that you guys praised, and I think you're the only guys who were praising this speech, threw you under the bus and you don't even realize it. But now I've explained it to you, and hopefully you can kind of see why this speech was so terrible. It not only threw everybody in America under the bus who would oppose white supremacy, but it also threw the white supremacists who worked so hard to build up this phrase alt-right in order to try and take over the conservative branch of the government. It kind of threw them under the bus too. Mr. President, they worked so hard to try and make it seem like they were conservatives. They tried so hard to make it seem like they were on the right wing of the party, that they weren't just extremists who were trying to coerce the party into a certain direction, which they kind of succeeded at, and they were kind of building up to it, and you took all that and you went, bye-bye. Inadvertently, but you did it. And that's, I think, that part of the speech, I think, is the biggest part. So the best way to end a conference like that, by the way, is always to advertise.
In Charlottesville, you'll see. It is the one. I mean, I know a lot about Charlottesville. Charlottesville is a great place that's been very badly hurt over the last couple of years.
So yeah, he advertised his winery at the end of that speech to put the big old cherry on top of this I don't give a crap Sunday. Literally, it's like, why is it that rich individuals only care about a place when they own property there? Why is it must be that we have to say, well, I own a property there, so I care about it? Like, why is it Donald Trump ties caring about something with owning property somewhere? First off. But, that's the best thing to do, I guess, is when, after you've made a speech that throws sour grapes upon basically everybody in the country, the best thing you can do is advertise your winery. Sour Grapes Winery. Tastes delicious. Yeah, no, not the best time, dude. Not the best time. It's like, literally, like, kangaroos don't like putting our feet in our mouths. So, like, because it could be pretty lethal. I mean, we freaking have huge feet, dudes. So, like, when you see something like this, it's almost like watching somebody stab themselves in the face. It's like literally like, oh my gosh, you're putting the entire Foot Locker in your mouth. Like, and as I said, you can watch the entire video of that speech there. It is like, it'll be studied as one of the biggest tragic sort of press conferences in political history, probably for a long time to come. Maybe I don't know if Trump's ever going to top it, really, because I think that was the speech that made conservatives wake up to the factor of the alt-right. And by the way, we in furry fandom, we also have a group called the alt-furry, which are basically alt-right furries. We also had conservative furries, which were called conservatives. And so, the fandom is a politically diverse group. But a lot of them who go to conventions or are highly sociable are somewhat more socially liberal. So they are very high GLBT ratios and stuff like that. I myself don't identify as any political thing. I did in the past. I've moved from one party to another in everything association. At this point, I've realized something in my life, and that is people are going to give you labels. Labels are not something you give yourself. If people don't like you, they're going to give you labels that they consider bad. If they like you, they're going to give you labels that they consider good. They're going to try and give you the labels that they share together. It's the idea of tribalism, and I'm not going to partake in it any further. So I'm not going to give my labels of a liberal or conservative or a libertarian or independent or any of that. I'm just done with labels. I'm giving myself labels. But at the end of this whole thing, we do have a group called Alt Furries, and their response to Charlottesville, less than interesting taste in people's mouths. They basically did memes on it, and here's a screenshot of like one of the leaked talking things that they did. Interestingly enough, this is a picture of a meme that they posted on their Twitters. With putting a picture of the Tasmanian devil persona Deo onto the person who was driving the car into the counter-protesters. Now, Deo, for those of you who don't know, you can click on this video up here, and it'll go through the whole Rocky Mountain Fur Con. Because furries, interestingly, have been dealing with sort of neo-Nazi-ish groups and alt groups starting to infiltrate our particular fandom and actually do some damage to conventions and stuff like that prior to the whole Charlottesville thing, which kind of brought it into the real world, which is kind of weird that furries are somehow the canary in the coal mine. Going back and looking at the articles that talked about the closure of Rocky Mountain Fur Con written by humans, it's interesting to make it sound, they made it sound like neo-Nazism and infiltration of extremist views was a problem that was isolated to the furry fandom or something like that. Look at these furries dealing with these furry Nazis. It's like, oh. And so, that was, and now it's like, not just our problem now, is it? It's everybody's problem now. So, this one here, so Deo was one person who was like doing the meme of punching Nazis after Richard Spencer got punched. She said, well, if any Nazis show up around me at a convention, I'm going to punch them. And so as a response, somebody on the Twitter responded to that. It's like, well, if you punch somebody, I'm going to shoot you. And so it sort of escalated from there. Deo contacted the staff of Rocky Mountain Fur Con to let them know that a violent threat was made. And Deo claims that that's all they did. Somebody else clearly saw that particular thing because it wasn't public. It was a public Twitter sort of discussion. Somebody else probably saw that and put, concerns into the hotel, into the comps of the local area, maybe. And so eventually, but whatever happened, eventually the hotel found out about it, and they increased the security insurance on the convention. And along with a bunch of other things that happened at the same time, and dealing with IRS behind their back, because apparently their leader was a sovereign citizen who doesn't believe in taxes. You can watch the whole thing cluster on my old video that talked about the closure of Rocky Mountain Fur Con. But basically, Deo, the alt-right who the alt-right took a lot of the blame from the people on the left side of the fandom for the closure of Rocky Mountain Fur Con. And in return, the alt-right blamed Deo for the closure of Rocky Mountain Fur Con. And Deo does have, unfortunately, like I say unfortunately, but she does seem to have sort of communist leanings, or at least she has like communist sort of things on her thing. So it kind of plays into their whole like, this is our enemy, communism is our enemy, Deo's our enemy, and here we are. So here we show that they were like, oh well, we found, like the meme was like basically, oh, we found out who drove that car through the counter protesters. It was Deo, and this is not just isolated into the fandom. There was also individuals that say, well, the person who drove the car into the counter protesters were hired by George Soros and some other conspiracy things about other people paying other people to do this, that, and the other thing. And, you know, this is the crux of the thing. A lot of people saw this joke in poor taste, this meme in poor taste. I think there's a little dark humor to it. And the dark humor is this. The alt-right stands for nothing. They stand for blame. They will blame anybody and anything for their own failures. They will never introvert. They will never look inside themselves and say, what can I do better? What can I do better for the community? What can I do for my country? Not what my country can do for me. That is who the alt are. When I grew up as a conservative, in a conservative household, my parents taught me that conservatism was about taking personal responsibility, about standing up and helping others, and not blaming other people for your own mistakes. Is to figure out how to improve yourself as a person and not rely on just the government to do it for you. That to me is the crux, is the foundation of conservatism, and it does exist very much to this day. Unfortunately, there are individuals who are younger, and you kind of see it in older conservatives when they roll their eyes at the youth and say they're not taking a responsibility. They expect everything to be handed to them. They're impatient. This is not because they think that the entire generation is going liberal. It's because they see the youth of their own party behaving in the manners of the alt. They can't even recognize their own party anymore. These older conservatives see these younger alt-righters and they say, these guys don't understand what it meant to be, to us, what a conservative was. That's what I see. And that meme about putting Deo in the position of the person who drove that vehicle and took a life emphasizes that point. It highlights it. It puts it in a big circle and says, this is what we are. Our group will not take responsibility for ourselves. I even put it, and to put an even more bigger emphasis on this point, this is a pattern of behavior. It's not just a one-off. I made a video here back in the day, open rumination, my first and only open rumination at this point, talking to Fox Miller, the leader of the alt-furry group, the Furry Raiders. And I told him, it's like, this is why people perceive this. If you take these actions, then you can probably do better for your group and commit to a better, improving things instead of, holding them back because a banner that you chose to fly is causing some contentions. And instead of taking personal responsibility for it, he let his peons go onto the comment section and start arguing his points for him. And at the same time, his visionary liaison basically called me a communist. In order to try, and I've called myself any number of things over the years, communism has never been one of them. And I guess it's because I have a red palate, which is just palatism, I suppose. But that's the problem. You will blame anyone. You will blame anything. And here's the thing. Your leader, the one guy you look up to, does this very same exact thing. Oh, it's the media's fault that my words are being misconstrued. It's not that I'm not good with words. Oh, it's their fake news. Like, I know what I said, but they don't know what I said because they're misconstruing what I said. We've had many, many presidents that had the media misconstrue what they said, but they still were able to get their job done. We have them blaming his allies and Republicans in the Congress saying, well, they can't get it done, so that's their fault. And it's not that I'm just keep on not leading and just kind of wishy-washy going, well, we want to repeal and replace. Well, we don't want to do the whole thing. Well, this repeal and replace thing that you put on my desk is kind of bad. Can you do it better? Well, he's going all over the place while his leadership's trying to go, can we just get something done? It's like, I'm just going to play around with it and make a big stink about it. I'm going to make random tweets and then blame Obama for everything. This is the essence of what the alt look up to. This is the essence of what the alts are. It's not about violence. It's about blame. They blame everyone else. They don't blame themselves. They cry out that the white people are so awesome and so great, but they blame others for the fact that they themselves can't contribute anything great to society. They're like, oh, well, I'd be able to contribute great things to society if it wasn't for the fact that Jewish people exist or black people existed, or it's not the fact that, and you know what, maybe the left doesn't help sometimes. Maybe the left goes, well, white people have all the power, and then you go to a powerless white guy and they say, well, I'm supposed to have all the power. So, of course, if I don't have all the power, then something must clearly be wrong. But it's a mess, is what I'm saying. But here's the thing. This is why your stint into politics is going to fester and die really quick. Nobody likes a whine ass who points at other people. Nobody leads a country by acting like a 5-year-old who knocks over a cookie jar in the kitchen, calls their sibling in, so sis, hey, come in here for real quick, and then goes, Mom, sister knocked down the freaking cookie jar from a shelf and knocked it onto the floor. It's the sister's fault. You might get away with it and you might not get in trouble, but guess what? Your sister ain't gonna like you for like the rest of the day, at the very least, and maybe for the rest of your life. You're thinking about the short-term protection of not taking responsibility for the bad things you do but in the long term, it's gonna bite you in the arse. And it already is. The conservatives are already seeing through this. That principle in which they believe their party has over the Liberal Party, and that is taking personal responsibility or trying to take personal responsibility, is being eroded by the alt-right, and that they're going to try and run counter to it. Anyways, that rambling aside, I'm going to get the hop out of here. Thank you very much for watching. Kick the like, kick the subscribe button, kick a comment in the comment section. I'm sure this one's going to get a lot of talking about. What do you think about the alt? Do you think they should control alt-delete? Do you think they should just go away? I don't know, but they really are not doing too good. And if they as individuals are not gonna change and take responsibility for themselves, and as a group they won't do it, then I think it's for the best that they fade out of the political dialogue and let people who are trying to solve problems actually get their jobs done and get out of the way. All right? But I'll let you comment on what your feelings are below as well. Thank you very much for watching.